Your accounts have shown a steady decline in the last 7 or 8 years. Your turnover has fallen, and state subsidies, state subvention is rising to fill the gap. You have your drop in attendance. You have some sponsorship have withdrawn from yourselves. The greyhound racing is on the decline internationally. I believe there's only 8 other countries where it's actually legal, but it's clearly not viable without the state subvention, and it clearly wouldn't be viable without state subvention. But given all of that and the steady decline and all of that I've said, it would be hard to justify it as a viable industry going forward in receipt of so much state funding, don't you think?
Thanks, Deputy. To the Chair, I suppose we've discussed this on the various contributions. There's no doubt it's a challenged industry, and I think by any measure or by any assessment, it is a challenged industry. We have diversified in relation to some of our income streams, and I've mentioned some of them earlier on. Is it a viable industry? Clearly, with a government subvention, it's not commercially viable. But I think there's a policy decision in relation to its importance to Ireland Inc., particularly its importance in rural areas and the economic, the social, the cultural, the heritage significance of the industry itself. But clearly viability is an issue, and I wouldn't dispute that point.
Given the exposé in the Prime Time report, there's definitely a question in relation to whether or not an industry, or certainly what people would question, whether or not an industry that allowed or allows such cruelty to animals, whether, and I'm not suggesting you allowed it, but whether you're aware it was taking place, and if you weren't aware it was taking place, then that raises even more questions. But certainly people would think that saw that you took no action to prevent it or stop it, and whether an industry, given all that, should receive state funding, continue to receive state funding. Do you accept that?
Yeah, and again, certainly we don't allow cruelty to animals, and I know you've clarified that. I mean, we would be very clear if there are welfare breaches, they should be brought to our attention. If they're in our remit, we will follow them up. If they're not, we will refer them on to the party that is responsible for them. We have taken a number of prosecutions in relation to welfare, some fairly serious issues which don't seem to get the media coverage. There is a lot of activity happening in that area, and I think it's probably a societal issue in terms of general cruelty to animals, and I'm not sure that everything should be placed at the door of the greyhound.
There was a comment by a vet, again on the Prime Time programme, that said that drugging dogs is rampant and sophisticated, and according to the documentary, other drugs are given to dogs to cover up the drugs they take to run faster. And whilst this wasn't reflected in the data in your annual report, I'm just wondering, could you give an outline of the methodology that's used to test the dogs and how they're chosen? Is the drug sophisticated enough to catch the drugs that are used to hide the other drugs? Maybe yourself or the department could answer that.
Yeah, so just I might take that one. I mean, again, we've referenced the programme earlier on, and we would have issues with what was said on the programme. We wouldn't agree with the veterinary comments. Last year we did, I think, 5,288 tests. 24 of those were negative. The equipment we use, the board made a €400,000 investment in it. It can trace parts per trillion, so it can trace the most minute amounts of any substance. The testing is done on a range of race testing before or after a race, and the dogs are selected on a random basis. For the Derby, which is taking place this weekend, all dogs would have been tested at the semi-final stage. They were tested at the final stage. They'll be tested in the kennels during this week before the Derby. and a lot of our other testing is out of competition testing. And we are looking currently, our testing is predominantly based on urine samples, and our veterinary director is looking at introducing blood sampling as a further, I suppose, robust measure in the testing area.
So it is sophisticated enough to catch the drugs that are hidden by the drugs?
And I think as equipment has improved, you can actually find parts per trillion, which is minute amounts of substances.
Okay, thank you. Just in relation to earlier on, when the questions were asked about, again, the prime time, you had said that in your report that yourselves had rehomed 1,000, but there was no accounting for the other either 5,000 or 6,000 dogs. And in your response earlier, you'd said to somebody that that was because you didn't have an accurate database. You also said that the legislation was going through at the moment in relation to traceability and that. But another thing you said was that animal welfare is a priority action for the board. But I was just curious, legislation is now going through and these issues are being addressed. But over all the years, clearly, there was a practice, we don't know what extent, but over all of the years, there was no real action taken. Did you press government departments? Did you press the department itself to bring in this legislation? Why is it just following, the reaction is just following the prime time exposé? Why, throughout every single year, knowing that there's, I presume you knew that this was going on, to what extent, you're aware that the not being able to account for the dogs, surely you were concerned, surely you wanted, it to be delved into. But why is it only happening now after it's been put into the public domain? That would be a concern for most people, particularly in light of the large sums of public money funding that you get.
Thanks, Deputy. To the Chair, I think over all the years there has been quite a lot happening in the welfare area. I think that story has not got out there. I would mention microchipping that came in 2016 for racing greyhounds. I would mention new regulations that came in regarding drug testing and adverse analytical findings, which are published since 2015. I mentioned the investment in the laboratory, the Welfare of Greyhounds Act of 2011. There's been a number of court cases that we have been involved in, which have been fairly significant. We have excluded people from the industry because of welfare issues. So there has been a lot happening, and on the rehoming, the numbers have been going up. And as I said earlier, last year was the highest number recorded to date. Having said all that, given the scale of the issue, there's no doubt that an awful lot more needs to be done. And I think what the board has announced, both in June and at the Ag Committee, and what we're implementing, we'll see very significant further strides being made in that area. But there was a lot going on in relation to welfare, and it has been a commitment of the board.
So you were aware, I accept that you weren't aware probably of the full extent of it, but you certainly knew that there was issues around traceability that you couldn't account, because you'd said that you couldn't account because there was no accurate database. But I just thought myself, in the interests of animal welfare, did you not feel there was an onus on yourselves as the board to bring this into the public domain, to highlight it, like the Prime Time programme did? Yeah,
again, to the Chair, I think all of these issues were highlighted in the discussions on the greyhound racing bill, which I think the discussion started late in 2014. Traceability formed part of that. Exports, which are outside of our remit, also formed part of the discussions. Welfare formed part of that. And I think we have been pressing for the legislative change, and now we have it since last May. Yeah, but you've never taken that step to do it publicly as such, to flag up the concerns that were there, to flag up what was flagged up in the documentary. But to the Chair, I'd say we have done it publicly, and the board has done it publicly, but perhaps it has not been picked up by the media as an important issue. Obviously, you might maybe, because I don't know if any of the members are aware of it, you might maybe forward that where you had flagged it up in the public domain, just for committee members, if that's all right, just so as we see that
Yeah, just in relation to yourselves as a board, what are you going to do moving forward to curb overbreeding?
Again, and it's part of our strategic plan, I suppose. Two things we are doing. First of all, we are trying to get a focus on quality breeding. So we'd be to education and information, trying to get people interested in the greyhound industry to look at the lines before they start breeding, so that they know before they do the breeding that there is a good prospect of a racing greyhound. Secondly, we have had advanced discussions with a third-level institution about launching a certificate in greyhound studies, which would be a 2-year programme. And again, we would hope people would avail of that programme to, if you like, professionalise the approach to the industry and to give people the tools necessary to engage in a quality breeding programme. I think breeding itself as an issue, there is likely a national policy issue in that, because, again, it isn't all about the greyhound, and I think breeding applies to all dogs and needs to be looked at on that basis.
Can I ask the department the same question, please, in relation to plans, measures to curb overbreeding? Are there any, since this has come to the fore?
Thank you for the question, Deputy. I think the most important thing here is, and it's even mentioned in the preferred results report, that they themselves say that their figures could be disputed because of the lack of a traceability system. This is at the core of everything. And the key now is that it's taken over 4.5 years to get the new act through. It was only signed by the President at the end of May. But we now have the powers and we now have the ability to put in place a really good traceability system. And this is actually the key to solving the question of how many greyhounds there are out there. The key is traceability, and it's well advanced in terms of a commencement order, and as Barton Gunn stated previously here, they're putting their traceability system out to tender at the end of October.
Okay, just one final question to yourself, Mr. Smith. The board, Mr. Dollard had said about, when I'd asked about the board themselves flagging up the concerns and the pretty much the details of what came out in the prime time, and he said that they didn't, put it into the public domain. Were your department aware of what methods they used to put it in the public domain as a board?
Yeah, the department was always aware of what they were doing on welfare, the fostering and rehoming and things like that. The difficulty that you had is that it hasn't actually resonated with the public in terms of what's being done on welfare. There's no doubt after the RTÉ programme there's a much greater emphasis on welfare, and that's very welcome. But it would be unfair to say that little or nothing was being done. There was an awful lot being done. It simply didn't resonate. The message didn't get across.
Yeah, but I mean, it was quite shocking, that programme. And the sheer scale and magnitude, and when you say, but it's very hard to give figures given the lack of traceability, well, that could go either way. It could go up either, so. But my question was, because I would find that a lot of people would be concerned that it took that programme, that neither the department or the board did enough to highlight it, to bring it to the fore, to bring measures to stop it and prevent it. And that, for most people, is the most worrying part. And that's why I asked you if the department were aware of the steps that the board said they took, and they put them in the public domain, and they took, because that's why I asked if we furnished them. Were the department made aware? And I'm not talking about the standard inspections and the 4 prosecutions or whatever. I'm talking about what appears to be wide-scale animal welfare abuses.
Well, firstly, we do not know the extent of the number of missing dogs without the traceability system. That's the first thing. I would agree with you totally about the shocking nature of the RTÉ programme. I absolutely 100% agree with you on that. As I say, the key here is that we now have the tools to put in place the traceability system. And the traceability system is the key to it. As I said before, it's not that nothing was being done on welfare. The simple fact of the matter is now the focus has to be totally on welfare. and that's the key to the actions of the board.
I'm conscious of time's not on our side, so I'll...
Thank you indeed. Next speaker is Deputy Peter Burke.